Hello and welcome back to Kilmainham Gaol for another one of our Kilmainham Gaol on lockdown videos. Slightly different today because we're not actually in Kilmainham Gaol, we're next door in the historic courthouse, and we're mostly going to be talking about one particular historical story today, that of the Invincibles, who had their preliminary hearings here in Kilmainham Courthouse in 1883. The courthouse was built in 1820, just beside Kilmainham Gaol, and it continued in use well into this century, and in 2016 then it was incorporated into Kilmainham Gaol Museum. We get to see now the courthouse as it is today, as I said, the thing we're really going to be concentrating in the next few videos is the story of the Invincibles. And this is an image of the courthouse at their preliminary hearing back in February of 1883. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Invincibles were a branch of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which had been, and the Invincibles were set up in Dublin as a kind of a secret assassination society or association, and they were largely led in Dublin by a man called James Carey. And in 1881 they went to the Phoenix Park, and there they assassinated the Chief Secretary, Lord Frederick Cavendish, who was just new into the job, and the Under Secretary, T.H. Burke, two of the most senior members of the British administration in Ireland, and they stabbed them to death just outside what was then the Viceregal Lodge, what's now Áras an Uachtaráin. And once the two men were killed, they made their escape in two cabs. One cab was driven by a man called Miles Kavanagh, and they headed south across the river, and they actually went by Inchicore Road, by this building, at around 10 to 8 on the evening of the 6th of May. The second cab was driven by a man called James Fitzharris, better known as Skin the Goat. He actually features in Joyce's Ulysses. And they headed north towards Phibsborough. So we're just going to head up into the balcony because we can get a better sense of how the building works in terms of trials and so forth. So according to the illustration that we're looking at downstairs, this is where the accused sat. So the investigation was led by a man called Inspector John Mallon, and in January of 1883 he ordered 26 members of the Invincibles to be arrested, and they were initially placed in Richmond prison. They went for their first hearing then in Green Street Courthouse, but then on the 27th of January he transferred 20 of them over here to Kilmainham Gaol, presumably because it was more secure, but also because it was just beside a courthouse, so there was less security risk when they were going for their preliminary trials. You can probably guess where the judge and or the magistrates sat. You can see the chair there. Initially there was a big canopy over that area, though in the illustration its grandeur is slightly offset by the fact that they had a row of hooks where they hung their coats and hats. But the really interesting feature, I always think, is this chair placed on a table. And it would seem that certainly in the 1880s in Ireland, witnesses were made sit in a chair on a table to give their testimony. And I suppose the most dramatic thing that happened here, as I said, only the preliminary hearings happened here, but the most dramatic thing that happened here was the fact that two of the Invincibles decided to inform against the rest of their comrades, and eventually a number of them actually turned on their comrades. The first one was Miles Kavanagh, the guy who had driven that getaway cab on the 6th of May. The second was much more serious for the rest of the Invincibles. That was the decision of James Carey, who, as I said, was the person really behind the group here in Dublin. He decided to testify against his comrades, and the reason they knew that he had decided to testify against them was when they arrived in for their hearing and they went to sit where they had sat before, they noticed he was missing. And he testified against them here, and largely, based on his evidence and that of Cavan and a number of other informers, as well as some circumstantial evidence collected by Inspector Mallon, a number of the men were sent for trial then in Green Street Courthouse. So in the next video, we're going to continue with the Invincibles, and we're going to look at how that Inspector John Mallon used the building of Kilmainham Gaol itself as a way of, I suppose, breaking the conspiracy and turning the Invincibles against each other. So that'll be in our next video. Now, we don't normally recommend books, but if you are interested in the Invincibles, we feel it's only fair to point out that a lot of the information for the videos that we're going to be doing about them comes from this book by Dr. Shane Kenna. Shane used to be a guide here in Kilmainham Gaol, and that's definitely reflected, I think, in his research and the way he wrote his book, because there's lots of really specific references to particular areas of the jail. And I suppose very tragically, Shane died at a very young age back in 2016. So this was his final book. So I suppose these videos, good or bad, or however they are, on the Invincibles are, I suppose, our tribute to his memory, because he's greatly missed by all of us who worked with him. Okay, so tune in for the next video, where, as I said, we'll find out a little bit more about how the Invincibles fared in the jail itself.